Before today's build, I want to announce History of the Future will be premiering on Friday, November 18th. History of the Future will be a series similar in structure to my other world-building series, where we will explore a living, breathing sci-fi universe of futuristic tech, unique star systems, alien cultures, and more through the lens of conceptual art and storytelling. I hope you're all as excited as I am and will be joining me for the 2-episode premiere. That being said, anyone remember back in September when I did Qui-Gon Jinn's lightsaber and promised Dooku's lightsaber for when Tales of the Jedi came out in October? Well, I was planning to release it on the 26th of October, the day the show came out, but that didn't happen. Anyways, today, originally for October but now for November, and for the release of Tales of the Jedi, I'll show you how I built a replica of the lightsaber of Count Dooku, and how, with enough determination, you can too. During pre-production for Attack of the Clones, the team were developing a secondary Sith Lord that would act as the main villain of the film. The original version was a female Sith assassin, the design of which would go on to inspire Asajj Ventress from the Clone Wars TV shows. However, when Christopher Lee was brought on, they knew that they had to go in a completely different direction and model the character around this legendary actor. One of those design homages was in the design of Dooku's lightsaber hilt. It was made curved like a dueling saber to reference the real actor's skill with fencing, as infamously he had done the most on-screen sword fighting out of any actor in history up to that point in time. This replica I planned to make in the most accurate way to the original prop, by doing it the way they did it and casting it in epoxy resin. This process they used in the prequel films and is the process that I've started using to create my own lightsaber replicas. For this build, you will need silicone mold maker, epoxy casting resin, as well as EVA and craft sheet foam, clay, wire, a dowel, electrical tape, aluminum tape, red, gold, and gloss black spray paint. I printed out a properly sized template at 13 inches, including the emitter guard, and then using this template, I cut the middle grip out of my 1-inch dowel, being careful to lay in the elegant curves present here in a clean a way as I possibly could with my Dremel. I cut off this middle section, being careful to cut the bottom side at a slant so that the pommel would fit on in the right way, and then I did the same for the pommel. I glued them together at the proper angle. To make the offset pommel, I created a sturdy base for the clay with the remainder of a roll of electrical tape. I then, of course, used the modeling clay to create the proper shape for the pommel. I did the same thing to create the pinky trigger above the pommel. The upper section is by far the most difficult to do, as it has this gradual curve instead of a sharp turn like the lower half of the handle. I made this using wire and aluminum foil as a base to get the correct curve, and then I created the surface details with the modeling clay. Be careful to flare out the top of the emitter, as well as to keep the curve as smooth as possible. But you can always wait for it to dry and then add or subtract supplementary material in the proper places in order to create the shape you need. When it was dry, I cut the proper grooves into the grip with the Dremel. Then I attached the emitter to the rest of the hilt with hot glue. I'm not super worried about the structural integrity of this piece, as it's only a blank, and it really only needs to survive up until the demolding process. But if you're making this part as your final piece, I'd maybe make the individual hilt sections fit into each other like puzzle pieces, and maybe make the guard out of plywood or something. To create the guard, I traced out the shape onto some foam and then glued it onto the handle. For the final greeblies, like the brass buttons, I used the hot glue, and it's ready to cast. I realized at this stage something that I had kind of been dreading the whole time, and that's that this was going to be very difficult to cast. I decided to cast it from the bottom, which means we will lose some detail on the end of the pommel, but That's the safest option. So we're going to run into a bit of an issue casting this. Unlike with the last lightsaber, it's not straight up and down, so when we stick this to the bottom, there's going to be a lot of space in the mold that's just going to take up a lot of material, where it kind of doesn't need to. Now, there's no real way to get around this unless you want to make a funny shape, which is just ruining the structural integrity of your mold, to be quite honest. But the way we're going to get around this is we're going to displace at least this space rocks. Because how could this possibly go wrong? I did the math, and even with that, I realized I wouldn't have enough material to fill the whole thing, so I waited a week and ordered some more. You see why this took so long? I then took that casting rubber, mixed it together in a few batches, and poured it in. Right up to the top, where a tiny tip peeked through. I can save this. So I bought a similar but cheaper batch just to cover the top, and after scoring the top, pouring it in, and letting it sit to seal it together, it was finally done. Hard part over, right? Well, so when I demolded this piece, I had to cut it out at a similar curve to the prop, and this meant, unlike the Qui-Gon Jinn lightsaber, I couldn't simply seal this seam back together by compressing the sides parallel to the cut. I did try compressing both sides, but let's just say that was not a very good idea. So I had to change up my strategy. Instead of trying to seal the cracks at all, I built a tighter box to contain all the spilt resin that was inevitably going to spill out. And that worked pretty well. The first cast came out basically perfect after the flashing was cut and the surfaces were sanded down, and the second came out even better. Now we are past the hard part. It was all about painting and chroming at this point. I painted over the bottom two sections with the gloss black, and once that was dry, I masked off the proper places and painted the pinky trigger red. I did the same for the greeblies in the emitter switch that were painted gold. And I used the good old-fashioned aluminum tape and laid it down as seamlessly as possible on the curved surface. And now we've built Count Dooku's lightsaber. Is what I would say if we were done. But like the Qui-Gon Jinn lightsaber, I also went through the effort to create a combat saber with a tracking blade, as they did in the movies. This presents a unique challenge for this specific lightsaber beyond the regular modifications required to create a combat prop like this. In order for this version to be sturdy enough to swing around, we have to get rid of the upper curve. I know what you're saying. Didn't someone notice? Well, maybe, but did you notice it in the movie themselves, where they went through the same redesign process? I didn't. So I cut off the top section, drilled a hole for the dowel to fit in, then attached the dowel as the tracking blade. I used some duct tape to fill out the proper diameter of the handle above the cut, and then attached a smaller dowel for both structural support on the side. This would also fill in the basic shape of the handle guard. I then painted the blade red. After a short chroming process using the aluminum tape again, now we can finally say we've built our own replica of Count Dooku's lightsaber. So, I'm sure you can not only tell by the delay that this was actually a very challenging build. I usually try to find the easiest way to do one of these builds to show you guys that replica prop building isn't really that hard, but, well, I guess some are hard. Either way, I'm very pleased with how this turned out. I love building these replicas, lightsabers in particular, as I'm sure you could tell. But even with that said, I'm gonna definitely try to pursue a few not Star Wars related props in the coming months, just to diversify the series and shake it up. Don't let that worry anyone who's recommended any lightsabers in the comments. I will definitely get to them at some point. That'll just be some way into next year. Besides, I think my wallet needs to heal from all that silicone rubber I've been buying. Anyways, as always, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, then feel free to subscribe and turn on the bell to get notified when I upload next.